Welcome to No Textbook for Life. Real lessons school forgot to teach us. I'm Malia, a wife and mom who's learned the hard way that adulting doesn't come with a manual. This podcast is about the lessons we were never really taught, the stories that shape us, and the wisdom we pick up along the way. Each episode, you'll hear honest experiences and practical insights to help navigate the messy, beautiful reality of adulthood. Because life doesn't come with a textbook. So, we are back with episode 2. I'm so excited about this podcast, and I actually can't believe it's finally started. So, welcome back. These are real lessons and experiences that I have gone through, and I figured why keep all this wisdom to myself, right? And it's also a audible journal for my kids. I have 2 daughters, and I'm hoping that they get to hear my stories and be able to have them to listen to even when I'm gone. And maybe someday my great grandkids can learn something from my experience as well. Okay, so if you listened to episode 1, I told my story about how I was just 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and some of the experiences I had going to college. But this episode, I am going to touch upon one of the main events that happened before I went to school. So I want to take you back to one of the scariest moments of my life. I was just 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and instead of worrying about dorms and textbooks, I found myself in a hospital bed fighting for my life with West Nile meningitis, or West Nile plus meningitis. It was terrifying. It was humbling. And yet, it also taught me lessons I still carry with me today. So let's dive in. Like I said, I gave some details about this experience in my last episode, but I'm going to go a lot more in depth, and I didn't really get to share many of those miracles that happened. A little bit of background: I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so there may be some terms that I use in this episode that we use a lot in my religion. So bear with me. I'll try to explain what I'm talking about. And I will say that through this sickness, I had a lot of spiritual experiences. So I am not going to turn this into a religious podcast or anything like that, but because it is my life and I experienced those things, I'm going to share them. So just know that this podcast won't only be that side of spirituality. It's just a life lesson I learned that includes those things. So let's get down to it. I was working at a fair in Ontario, Oregon, and I had a little side gig working the table at a bubble ball event. The owners had these giant inflatable bubble balls, and you put them over your body, and you can run in them. You can hit other people that's wearing a ball as well in them, and you bounce off. You can roll a bunch. It's pretty fun. It is not something you want to do if you have head trauma, pregnant, or any sort of injuries. And you also don't want to do it if you don't want a sprained ankle or sprained knee. That is very possible. So just a warning there. Yeah, I was at the fair, and I was there 2 or 3 days. I don't remember. All I remember is that is where I was attacked by tons of mosquitoes. There was so many mosquitoes there. And I mean, maybe the infected mosquito wasn't that fair, but I'm pretty sure that it was. I didn't have any bug spray, and I had tons of mosquito bites, and I'm pretty sure that is where I contracted West Nile. So you obviously don't think anything about it after you've been bit by a mosquito. And the way that they transfer this disease is a mosquito has to draw blood from an infected bird. I'm pretty sure it's like how it all happens, and then they transferred it to me. And there was also 5 other people that year that contracted West Nile in that area. So that is kind of a big reason why I think that is where I contracted it in the first place. So that was around the end of July, and I didn't have any symptoms, I want to say, for about a week. And I was at work in the factory, and I remember having this full body rash for like 2 days, and it felt like straight sandpaper on my whole body. Any sort of like clothing rubbing against my skin just hurt so bad, and no amount of creams was making it any better. A few days after the full body rash, I was having major fevers. And honestly, I just wasn't feeling good for about 2 to 3 weeks. And the days leading up to being hospitalized, I had extreme headaches, high fevers, and I couldn't really eat or drink anything. I remember trying to eat some grapes and some saltines, and sip on some water. I was laying in bed for a couple days. I could not get out of bed. I would barely make it to the bathroom and back, but I was so dehydrated that I didn't have to go very often. But I remember anytime I stood up, I would get extremely faint. So this one instance, I went to the bathroom. Luckily, it was my bedroom, and then right next to me was the bathroom. So I got up, walked a few feet to the bathroom, and on my way back, I remember falling into my bed because of just how dizzy and exhausted I was just from doing that. So obviously I knew something was wrong. And August 18th, I texted my mom. She was at work she's a secretary at a school, and she finally got home. And I was like, I gotta go to the hospital. And she got home, and she was kind of dilly-dallying, just didn't realize how sick I was until she was taking me to the hospital. So I was trying to walk out to the car. And on my way to the car, I had fainted. So my dad had to carry me, put me in the car. Then when we got to urgent care in Nampa, I walked into the urgent care, and right when I went through the doors, I fainted again. So the nurses and the people at urgent care, they put me in a wheelchair. And because I had fainted right in front of everybody, I got to kind of skip the urgent care line and go straight into a room and get checked out. This was 9 years ago, so I'm trying to remember a lot. Here is what I do remember. I was in a lot of pain. First of all, I just fainted, so I felt all bruised up from hitting the ground. And then my head was pounding, and that happens when I faint. Is you got the head pounding, da da da. So I remember that, and just being sensitive to light. My dang dog just saw some people on the bikes and decided to bark. So anyways, that's what you heard. They were trying to test me for all sorts of stuff. And one of the ways that they tested was a spinal tap. And I mean, I've had an epidural now, with my first baby, I had an epidural. And I will tell you that the spinal tap was far more painful than the epidural. So it's where they stick a long needle into your spine and they take fluid to test some stuff. I don't know what they were testing for, and I don't know if that's how they found the West Nile. But I mean, they did the spinal tap, and then they couldn't find what was wrong with me for 3 days. All sorts of blood tests were done for 3 days, and they put me in a room. I remember a nurse would come in with a mask on, or my mom would come in with a mask on, and then they would tell me like, oh, you need a mask on. So people would come in not with a mask, but I needed a mask. And then there was one time where everyone had to wear these giant hazmat suits, but they weren't telling me what was going on. They were just pumping me with all sorts of stuff through the IV. And those first 3 days were probably the worst, just not knowing what was going on. Nobody cared to come visit me during those first 3 days. The only one who would was my mom, of course. And finally, they told me that I had West Nile, and they didn't catch the meningitis part yet. But my neck was extremely stiff, and I just had major headaches. So it was a scary experience. So August 18th, I was scheduled to move out of my house and go to college on September 13th. And so I only had a few weeks before I was supposed to leave. So I had all of that to think about on top of this disease that finally figured out what it was. So West Nile virus, it does it can cause neurological issues. So less than 1% develop neurological issues. And that was me. So I'm the 1%. And that was the meningitis, which is basically inflammation around the brain and spinal cord. So it was not a fun ordeal. I hate headaches. I mean, who likes a headache? Anyways, so it's basically a like weeks long migraine. And then just laying in a hospital bed does something to you. I hurt my back and my legs were sore from not being able to walk around because anytime I stood up, I'd faint. I had to go get x-rays. What were they x-raying? They were x-raying something on my chest, and I had to stand up. And I literally fainted 5 times during my x-rays. And I would faint and then wake up and be like, oh, sorry. And then they try to do the x-ray. Then I'd faint again. And I'm like, okay, we gotta fix something here. So I did end up staying in the hospital for 8 days. And that also included a emergency transfer to a bigger hospital in Boise. That had nothing to do with West Nile meningitis, I believe, because my heart rate was dropping so low that I got sent to a cardiac ICU. Yeah. My heart rate dropped to 28 beats per minute in the night while I was sleeping. And they were about to put a pacemaker in if it dropped any lower. Luckily, it did not. So I did not have to end up with a pacemaker. But the pain was constant. Like I said, I was in the hospital for 8 days, so muscles were weak, everything was stiff, but my neck, so stiff, I could barely move it. Just tons of weakness. Anytime I sat up or stood up, I felt dizzy and fainted a lot those days. And at 18 years old, when you're supposed to be independent and starting your life, it's a little humbling to not even be able to walk, especially like to the bathroom on your own without being worried about fainting and hitting something. And here's the real fear, right? Is I didn't know if I'd ever fully recover. I didn't know if I'd make it home. There was just a lot at that moment. And if you look into West Nile a little bit more, I talked to some West Nile survivors, and they continue to have major headaches for weeks on end. They still suffer with episodes of headaches and head trauma. It's bad enough that it affected their schooling and their life. So that is kind of where I want to get into the miracles. So, I mean, there's so many. I'm trying to think of the order that they went in. Okay. This is kind of where my religion comes into play. So, we have, I should have thought about how to explain this. We do these things called blessings that can be healing. And I had my bishop of my ward. The bishop is just like the overseer of a group of people in our church. There's several of them, but this specific bishop was one that looked over the ward I was in. So he came, and his son came, who I was really good friends with, and another friend of mine who was preparing to leave on a church mission. So this was his first ever blessing that he gave. He he was just about to leave on his mission. So the three of them came to the hospital and gave me this blessing, and he in his blessing said that I would not have any after effects of this West Nile, and that was my biggest worry. And he's an 18-year-old kid, and he told me that I would heal and that I wouldn't have any side effects from this disease or meningitis. And then he left on his mission. He didn't even know the fact that I did recover, and 9 years later, I have not had any side effects from West Nile or meningitis. I just have your typical headache if you don't drink too much water, like enough water kind of thing. So there's a miracle. Another miracle I remember is that the nurse came in one day, I think on day 4, and she said, "Oh, we found MRSA in your blood." And that's some kind of like a flesh-eating disease. I think I said that wrong, but it's not good. And to have it in your blood is probably one of the worst things to happen. And they were gonna have to do all this stuff to try to get rid of it, da da da. And I just remember being super scared about that because this is a serious thing to have. So MRSA is kind of like a staph infection. Someone comment if I'm wrong, because I mean, I'm not a doctor. I feel like these are just things I remember researching 9 years ago. Anyways, so then I got another blessing from my uncle, who is my favorite to receive blessings from. And he knows who he is. Anyway, so he blessed me to be healed. And the next day, the nurse came in with more blood tests, and she told me that I no longer had the MRSA in my blood. She was confused, but just figured maybe there was something that had gone wrong with the tests, or a false negative. And I believe that, I was healed from that blessing to not have such a dangerous infection in my bloodstream. And then, I mean, I didn't have to get a pacemaker, so that's another miracle. And I was released from the hospital. Released very weak. Like I said, my muscles just kind of were eaten away during that time of recovery. And I only had a few weeks until moving day for college. But what's crazy is after those 8 days in the hospital, I got out and I just kind of went about my normal life before I got sick. And usually that's not the case. So I felt like I was 98% healed by the time I was packing up to go to college. And I mean, that's besides the fact that I was a bit out of shape. Right, I'd been sitting around for 8 days. And so when I went to college and started doing the preseason workouts and hikes and basketball practices, I did need like a little bit of extra time to make sure I had a snack like halfway through practice, or I was definitely a lot slower on the hike, just trying to work up those muscles again. Luckily, my coaches were they understood that I was still recovering, so um, I that's a miracle in itself that I was just able to leave the hospital and just get better that fast and not have any side effects from that. So, there's a lot of things I look back on that could have gone wrong, or had been worse, but this was an experience I was able to go through and to recover from and learn from. And looking back now, West Nile meningitis taught me so much more than any textbook ever could. Here are the biggest lessons I took away. Okay, so I learned at 18 years old, after feeling invincible for my whole life, being a youth, that life is fragile. But as human beings, we are extremely resilient, So this showed me how quickly life can change. But it also showed me how strong we really are as mortal beings, you know? So lesson number 2 is that faith and miracles are real. I feel like you have to have that faith to be healed, as well as to receive those blessings too. And I'm not saying that God's going to heal you every time, and that not everyone will experience a miracle like I did. But in that moment, I was fortunate enough to experience that, because, there were some moments that I shouldn't have had the strength that I did. And there are a lot of things that should have been worse, and they weren't. Number 3, health is something we, or I, definitely take for granted. Walking, eating, having energy, you don't realize how much these matter until they're gone. And I've had 2 kids, so like not being pregnant too also helps me be grateful for having energy and all that good stuff. Okay, number 4, trials prepare you for the future. As awful as it was, this trial gave me resilience for everything that came after heartbreak, moving away, and like I said, like being a mom. It was a foundation of strength that I didn't know I was building. Um, so those are the lessons that were learned from such a painful and unbearable experience. And honestly, it was a lot of there was a lot of mental things that went into that too, of not knowing what was happening versus what was going to happen after, as well as just hoping that the pain would be over. But it's something that I guess I just had to experience in this life, and that's okay. So every experience, right, it still ministers to our education and to the development of just being human. And it's through sorrow and suffering and tribulation that we gain the education that typically we came here to acquire. So I definitely believe that with my whole heart, because West Nile wasn't something I'd wish on anyone, but it definitely shaped me into who I am. Okay, so that's my story of surviving West Nile meningitis at 18. It was scary, painful, and exhausting, but it gave me a deeper appreciation for life, faith, and resilience. If you've ever gone through something that shook you to your core, I hope that you remember that no trial's wasted and that you're stronger than you think. Thanks for joining me on this episode of No Textbook for Life. If you want the video version, head over to my YouTube channel, Modern American Mama. You survived another episode. See you next time for more lessons school didn't teach us.